Hello, my name's Jackie Kay and I'm Chancellor of the University of Salford and also the Scottish Macker or the National Poet of Scotland. For years I've been coming to Manchester Literature Festival and I really admire the whole festival. I admire its ethos, I admire the way that you support activists and political thinkers as well as writers known and less well known. I admire the way that you support writers in translation. I admire your Manchester sermon. I think the events have a great buzz and energy to them, and I've been at so many over the years. I've loved doing events myself, often with my dear friend Ali Smith. They've been fantastic events. I've also loved attending events like the Manchester Sermon, which have given me food for thought for a very, very long time. Well, it's upsetting to me that you're in danger now, and I would really love anybody who supports you and literature, new writing and writers around the world to dig a wee bit into your pocket and pay the price of a drink or the price of a theatre ticket or anything that you could actually afford and go on the website www.manchesterliteraturefestival.co.uk. Cheers.
Hello and welcome to the Sunday of Manchester Literature Festival. I'm Katie Popperwell and today I'm thrilled to be in conversation with one of the UK's most loved and celebrated authors, Nick Hornby. Nick is the author of 8 novels, including About a Boy, High Fidelity and his memoir Fever Pitch. 6 of these novels have been adapted for film, television and theatre, and he's also written award-winning screenplays for film and television, including In Education, Brooklyn, Wild and State of the Union. Nick is a great observer of human relationships, romance and neuroses, and his latest novel, Just Like You, is about a fledgling romance between a working-class black man in his early 20s and a 42-year-old middle-class white mother, set in 2016 during the EU referendum. And it's this novel, among other things, that we're here to discuss today. Nick, welcome to Manchester Literature Festival.
Thank you very much, Katie.
And we're going to start with a bit of a reading from the book.
So one of the ways in which Lucy and Joseph get close in the book is that Joseph starts to babysit for Lucy. And this is the first time that he's gone to her house. She's gone out on a date with a more appropriate and age appropriate and everything else appropriate man. And Joseph's had to call her home because her ex-husband, who has dependency issues, has come around drunk, and Joseph has ended up pushing him into the hedge. Her boys are not aware of this. They're inside watching TV. "You're early," said Dylan when Lucy came home. "You said Joseph would be putting us to bed." "Yeah, well, I'd finished my main course and I didn't like the look of the pudding, so I came home." This was the kind of logic they understood. It was hard to imagine that they would behave any other way, even when they were 40 and going to their own dinner parties. They would hover by their door and say, in one unbroken word, "Thanks very much for dinner, I've finished now and I'll put my plate in the dishwasher." "What? Take your headphones off." "I've only got one ear in, what did you say?" "I said I'd finished my main course and I didn't like the look of the pudding, so I came home." "Well, what was the pudding?" "Why is Mum home?" said Al. "She didn't like the look of the pudding." "What? Take your headphones off." "They are off." They weren't off. "Mum didn't like the look of the pudding." "Well, what was the pudding?" "She won't tell me." "Fruit, probably." "Just fruit?" "Probably. Not much of a pudding." "Duh, that's why she came home, penis head." "Oh, will you please stop saying that?" "Sorry. Anyway, you can stay up a bit longer. I'm having a cup of tea with Joseph." "What?" Lucy felt that the latest "what" marked the end of the conversation, so she went through to the kitchen. She didn't want a cup of tea, though. She wanted a drink, but she felt awkward about it. If you needed a drink because your drunk ex had come round and got into a shoving match with a babysitter, Was that post facto enabling of some sort, or inappropriate dependency? Alcoholism by proxy? She imagined that there might be support groups for all of these conditions if you looked online. Islington post facto enablers probably met every Thursday in the basement of St. Luke's Church. Would it seem really inappropriate if I had a glass of wine? Well, said Joseph, I suppose it depends whether you're an alcoholic who will want to fight me when you've knocked it back. No. Fine by me then. People drink. Do you? Sometimes. Would you like one? You don't have any beer, do you? I think the Indian might have given me a free one with the last takeaway. She rummaged around at the back of the fridge and poured it, a bottle of Kingfisher. He drank it straight from the bottle, the first half very quickly. I'm so sorry, said Lucy when she poured her glass of wine. No, it's fine. Well, it isn't. I didn't warn you it might happen, and you weren't expecting it. Had it happened before? I mean, to other babysitters? No. Plus, it didn't cross my mind. I suppose in my defence, it would have been like a warning about a burglary or a lightning bolt. Joseph spent longer than he should have done wondering what was wrong with this comparison. He knew about burglars and lightning bolts and had assessed the risks accordingly. He didn't know that Lucy had an alcoholic ex-husband who might turn up at any moment. He was a bit more than a lightning bolt. He was more like a loaded gun or a forgotten knife in a pocket.
Thanks, Nick. So just like you, it's all about connections. And even though it deals with very culturally specific set of circumstances and identities, in many ways it feels like a very universal portrait of how intimacy is created between two people. So why was that something that you wanted to do?
Well, I think that was how it started. I thought about this couple some years ago. It was after observing a little flirtation, I think, in a shop between the customer and the person serving, and it was pretty much as described. They were different races, they were different ages, and I started to think, oh, you know, there's a vibe there. They're a cute couple. Why won't they ever get together? They won't ever get together. And I started to think about all the reasons why, connected with education and class and age. And I thought, oh, I wonder if they're as insurmountable, all of these things, as we think. And that led me to think about the way we normally choose our partners. We in sort of Western societies, we think arranged marriages are a funny idea, but that's more or less what we enter into, because we want someone who has the same educational background as ourselves, same class background as ourselves, and these relationships actually aren't working either. So maybe there was another way of doing it. And I parked this couple until the year of the referendum. And then when it seemed as though one half of the country would never speak to the other half again, I thought, oh, maybe this is the time to write about what divides us.
That's so interesting that's the route that you took into it, because it sounds like what you're saying is this would never happen. It's kind of an exercise in fantasy in a way. If you saw that couple and you said they would never get together.
Yes.
Decided to create a different...
Close as I'll ever get to science fiction.
So how did you do it?
Well, I really started to think about the things that I presumed I would be bothered by if my partner were wildly different, and thinking, really, does that matter? And, you know, you look back on your own relationships and, you know, if you have kids with somebody and you think, well, it's really important that they're a reader. I mean, within about 2 years of having kids with somebody, you're really not talking about the Booker Prize shortlist anymore. You're dealing with crises and managing and trying to relate. And you realize that actually the things that count are kindness, a sense of humor, shared values, all sorts of things that it seemed to me can come up in all kinds of contexts.
The tension between them seems to come often not because they actually disagree about something, but because they're being overly sensitive to what they expect the other person to be concerned about. So the way that Lucy worries about her body, and Joseph is quick to pick up on any remark that Lucy makes that suggests that she's conscious of his race, but it's all very sensitively dealt with. Were you ever tempted to have them just have it out?
I wasn't really. It didn't strike me particularly that that's what Lucy would ever do. One of the things that kind of I wanted to write about is that Lucy, she's the head of department in a comprehensive school, and she's really aware about race, as anyone who works in an inner city school has to be. And so what takes her by surprise is what it's like to have a relationship with someone from different race, as opposed to be aware of issues, that this is completely different. She starts to have personal experience of the sort of petty institutional racism and thoughtlessness that someone like Joseph or Joseph's friends suffer every day living in Britain. But it is quite low key. And as you say, a lot of it comes from just terrible awkwardness and leaving things below the surface, which I think we do in England anyway.
Oh yeah, that is a very British thing, isn't it? But the little hurdles that they do jump over, which you do just because I was thinking of them as hurdles, and then later on in the book they're described in that way, and that was really that's always a really rewarding moment when you're like, oh, I've got it, great. But the club, the dinner party, all those kind of things. I really love that bit where Joseph works out how conversation works. And it's a real kind of epiphany for him, but it's such a recognizable, lovely moment. Did you find writing those hurdles difficult to navigate?
I think not so much. I think that they were something that had interested me for a while. I mean, like, I'd been thinking about this couple for probably 2 or 3 years on and off, and they were just off in the corner somewhere, which quite often happens before I start to write a book. I'm doing other things, and the people are alive in me somewhere, but I don't know what to do with them. So at idle moments, I go back to them, and then I find another detail for them. So there's the creative side, but also, I guess, class and education is something that I'm interested in and think about quite a lot. That in England, I think we have a very narrow definition of what intelligence means. We have a very narrow definition of what culture is, and that kind of plays to my strengths in a way. Something I've been thinking about for quite a few years now.
I was really struck by the fact that Joseph is 22, because it's such a crazy age. It almost reminds me of being a toddler again, where your kind of capacity to get into trouble outweighs your capacity to understand consequences. Like, people are suddenly like adults without quite being ready for the world. How did you approach writing a 22-year-old?
Well, I kind of cheated a bit, because Joseph is clearly quite a responsible 22-year-old.
Very.
But again, those kids are not outside my realm of experience. I know lots of kids who, have responsibilities to much younger siblings or to parents, and quite a few who look after kids. I mean, I've got 2 boys of my own, or two kids of my own, who I was thinking about when I was writing this, and we found that using a male carer instead of they had female when they were very little, but by the time they got to kind of football, Xbox, violence age, it was way better to have a young man who could thump balls at them, those kinds of young men were actually, they were very in tune with the kids, and they've been put in a position of responsibility. So Joseph is one of those. I mean, he does a couple of things that really don't help the relationship in the short term, but beyond that, he's all right.
Yeah. You said, you enjoy writing about culture, about cultural differences. It's something that's appeared in a lot of your work. You're always very good at skewering tribal characteristics, and very funny when writing those kind of blinkered, self-absorbed, self-regarding characters. What were the tribes that you wanted to explore here?
Well, one of the things that pushed me over into writing the book was my own tribe of Remainers. I voted Remain. I live in a borough that voted Remain, in a city that voted Remain fairly overwhelmingly. And like everyone else, I was shocked to learn that people thought differently. But as that post-referendum period went on, I started to become increasingly frustrated by my own team. And the kind of rather wishy-washy arguments they were giving for staying in Europe. And also, I think it was true for all of us, how far out of our comfort zone we were led to make passionate arguments about things we knew nothing about. I've got lots of friends who know everything there is to know about independent movies of the 1970s, or R&B, or football, or contemporary fiction. And I was amazed to find them shouting about World Trade Organization terms. And I think, you don't know anything about this. I don't know anything about this. And I began to see it more as a matter of faith. It became like Protestantism and Catholicism in those 2 or 3 years.
There's a sort of widely held belief, isn't there, that identity politics is something that belongs to the left, but Brexit is a real example of how identity politics has functioned on the right. And you write brilliantly in this about people not understanding what they're talking about. And later, right at the end, there's a great line: Brexit floated clear of its details and it became like a religion.
Well, that was how I ended up thinking about it. And that was what I wanted to write about, really, was the confusion and division caused by this thing. And I think at some point Lucy says they could have asked us anything. They could have asked us whether we approve of nude church going, and we could have had the fight about that. So some of us would and some of us wouldn't. And we could all fall out, and it would reveal exactly the same things about the culture. In the end, I thought that what we were asked was the question, are we happy?
It was a huge failure of nomenclature. The notion of remaining is what you remain in a bad relationship. It's static.
And it suggests that you're happy with the way things are. And I kept thinking back. I know this is going to sound weird, but I have a severely autistic 27-year-old. And around, I guess it was 15 years ago, there was that MMR scare. And all the parents of autistic kids were asked if they thought that the vaccine was responsible for their child's condition. And suddenly autistic parents were all over the news. Well, autistic parents were incredibly unhappy with the provisions being offered, with no education, very hard to get hold of anything. And suddenly microphones were under their noses. And if they'd said 100% no, they knew that the microphones would go away again. So there was a sort of investment in keeping it ambiguous, at least, so that the conversation went on. And I think if you ask people, as I say, are you happy? And they say, yeah, everything fine, then they know the microphones are going to go away again. And this was a way of capturing our attention for a long time to come.
Absolute language is not neutral, is it? And there's bias inherent in those questions and the way that they're asked as well. There's a moment quite near the beginning of Joseph and Lucy's relationship that I was really struck by, where they start talking about Brexit. And like you say, her arguments are kind of feeble and a bit vague, and it actually made me quite cross but I thought it was a really great illustration of how much there was during the referendum, or the lead up to the referendum, a real failure on the part of the left to articulate the optimism and idealism and the romance, actually, of the European project that Lucy also seems to be guilty of. But I noticed that you didn't put that anywhere. You didn't give that to any of the other characters. And I was half expecting you to you must have wanted to. You must have really wanted to.
Yes, but it was not my experience that people had access to those arguments at the time. And when I was writing the book, I went back to my cohort, as people have said a million times this year, I went back to them and said, can you remember why you voted Remain? And the same stuff was still coming out. Like, I want my kid to go to a European university, or to be able to go to a European university. You think, what? Your kid's never going to do that, and no other kid's ever done it either. So is that the best you can do when you're arguing with people whose communities have been wrecked, or so they feel, by globalization? There was one thing when I was doing research, I found an article that Toibin wrote in 1975 and for The Spectator about the referendum then, because I'm old enough to have voted in 2 referendums. And he didn't half sound like Boris Johnson. It was about keeping control. It's like, how can it be right that we cannot write our own laws when we're a sovereign country? I thought, wow, it's so interesting that that was the dissenting opinion in 1975 from the left, but it was also a respectable argument to make, clearly, then.
Yeah. I mean, novels that deal with current affairs in that way are a tricky thing. I kept thinking about how, I remember in the wake of 9/11, there were a lot of very thinky pieces about how fiction was forever changed. And in actual fact, it wasn't really.
No.
And I've been thinking,
I remember,
we're only just getting the Brexit. Go on.
No, I remember reading countless articles about the word processor novel in the late 80s. It's like, oh yeah, this is a word processor novel. It's a typewriter which enabled you to cut things up. That's all it is. But yes, sorry.
Well, just that, we're only just getting the Brexit novels now. And I wonder how you think COVID's going to work in the world of fiction, and whether or not, how that's going to emerge, and how we might understand or misunderstand how it's going to affect fiction.
Well, it's all about timescale. I mean, I could write this novel because it had an end point that came before we knew what was going to happen. I think there's a lot to say about this year. We don't yet know if there's going to be the same amount to say about next year. I think if you can focus on where it affects us all as humans, then you're on safe territory. And one of the things I thought about COVID, it's probably the first crisis of my lifetime where it's going on when you look out of your window. We've had all the 9/11s and the Berlin Wall coming down, and that they're huge, but you just put on the TV and have your dinner just the same. But COVID is like, you look out the window, you see people wearing masks, or you see nobody at all, or you hear ambulances. And it's the first emergency that's affected us, every single one of us, in real time as it's happening on the streets. And that's kind of interesting, I think.
Yeah. Coming back to what you were saying about how Just Like You finishes before, it finishes before we get to kind of see the effects of it. But it does seem to have 2 very distinct acts, the kind of pre-post referendum, and also the way that kind of mirrors the stages of the relationship between Joseph and Lucy. Were you very disciplined about the structure of that from the beginning?
No, I didn't know that was what it was going to feel like, I don't think. But when I was at a certain point, I thought, oh, that's quite neat. It will divide neatly. And I wanted to flash forward a bit to show where the relationship was at the end, which meant kind of coming forwards politically in time a little bit as well. But I tend to start really with characters and an idea of tone, I guess. And beyond that, a lot of things are generated along the way.
Yeah. There's a lot of really great minor characters in this that I really enjoyed. And I wonder, because Michael, the novelist in particular, is a real source of comedy, and he has this kind of liberal middle class intelligentsia. I wonder if it's tempting to put some of your most feared or worst characteristics in there, or those of your friends.
No, I really try and leave my friends alone, especially, I found, with major characters, the moment that they do something that you haven't done or your friends haven't done, they're their own person. They're off on their own journey, because every step we take narratively in real life creates who we are, and so very quickly I lose the idea that they are drawn from life, even though I try and keep them real. The minor characters, I mean, I'm a huge Dickens fan, and his minor characters are just unbelievable. You get 2 pages that you never see them again, and you never forget them for as long as you live. And it's a combination of Dickens and also learning from writing screenplays, that the more you can make of a small part, the better the chance you have of someone good doing that small part.
That's interesting. So do you know them? Do you know the minor characters as well as your principal?
No, no, and one of the joys of writing on a day-to-day basis is going in the morning not knowing that you would need a minor character, and then thinking, oh, he could do this or she could do that, and that would be funny, or and so you feel like you're generating people on the hoof in a way that really feels kind of fresh in terms of the working day.
There's a really nice quote by Ian McEwan that I've always loved, where he said, it's a total glib thing, but it's really nice. And he said something about how writing hurts my neck because he's craning to watch his characters walk around the room.
Right.
So it's really lovely. So there comes a point where they're just totally out of his control. Yeah. Do you feel like, did you feel in this book that your characters did things that surprised you?
No, and I've never quite understood that notion of surprise, because they do what I want them to do, and I make them up, and I tell them what's what.
Yeah, your dad. Coming back to what we were talking about before a bit, about we touched on kind of cultural markers.
Yeah.
This is something that you write about and have written about for many years so brilliantly, and it seems to me in some ways like the ethic of this book is completely the polar opposite of that ethos that Rob has in High Fidelity, where he's like, it's not what you like, it's what you like that counts. And that kind of, this is actually it's completely a polar opposite.
Yes.
Is that something that you thought about or you're conscious of at all?
No, I wasn't, but I'm conscious of having become more and more aware as I've grown up that it's possible to make links with people outside of your tribe, I guess. I mean, when I was 20, I couldn't imagine ever knowing anyone who didn't know as much about music and football as me. That was who I wanted to be with. But as you get older, you first of all, you add other interests and you value other qualities in people.
What is it? Because would you say that music and football are your key markers? They're your kind of cultural touchstones, if you like.
No, I would say now I would say music, books, and films.
I really enjoy your columns in the Believer mag. They're great, and there's actually quite a lot of the things that we've been talking about are things that you kind of touched on.
That was an important column for me, I think, in terms of being able to work things out.
This is what I wanted to ask you, to what extent you use that as a little petri dish to kind of work out ideas that you would then put in different places.
I didn't know I was doing it, but I mean, it's kind of less artful than that, because they're very much a reflection of where I'm at month by month with my thinking, and the thinking that's created by the books I'm reading, actually. So the books create thoughts, and the thoughts created create thoughts about books, sort of kind of thing. And it's been great to have that forum to, I can make stupid jokes about stuff in there as well, but and to champion books. But I'd say it's been a very pure expression of just things I've been thinking about over the years. The purest expression, I guess.
The thing that whole idea that of people kind of attaching themselves and expressing them and constructing themselves through the things that they like and the things that they affiliate themselves to, it almost feels like going back to high fidelity. It like foregrounds social media and online dating in so many ways, because they do become the most important things about you. You know, you like
they've cut everything else out completely now. It's just that.
How do you feel about social media?
I don't. Well, I like Instagram's what I use, and it seems quite gentle compared to the rest of it. I packed up Facebook when I got frightened about what they were doing, and Twitter I read, but I don't tweet. I think it's a bit of a suck on energy and creativity, really. If I've got any good lines.
And it does seem to highlight divisions, I think, more than it.
Oh my God, yeah. I mean, even my dabbling with Twitter, I find that I'm kind of in an echo chamber of my own world already. And then you get correspondingly shocked when people retweet something that's from the other side. And I don't feel entirely comfortable with it as a means of either expression or learning, I don't suppose.
No. Now, there's a lot of anxiety at the moment, and a lot of it on social media, about cultural appropriation. But it's something that's absolutely necessary for writers, and that always has been. And actually, there's a really great, Zadie Smith wrote an essay last year.
Yeah, I read it, yeah.
Brilliant. You read it, Fascinated to Presume in Defense of Fiction. And one of the things that she says is, what would our debates about fiction look like if our preferred verbal container for the phenomenon of writing about others was not cultural appropriation, but rather interpersonal voyeurism or profound other fascination, or even cross-epidermal reanimation, which I really like. And I wondered, you know, in terms of what you've done, you write a lot from female point of view. You're writing here a young black man. Because the thing is, this is a really long question, but it's a complicated thing to talk about.
Yeah.
There's a rich history of novels that represent the racial other or the oppressed minority in a way that really amplifies prejudice and can be really monstrous. So it must be something that you have to take very seriously and have to think about very carefully from your position of privilege when writing it. So how did you approach that, and how do you feel about it?
Well, I was nervous about it. And of course, the more life went on, the more nervous I got, because this, really blew up while I probably between finishing and publication, I guess. I mean, I thought, of course, long and hard about it. And one of the things that I thought that made me really determined to do it is that I live in a multicultural borough. I think 7 of the 8 books or something are set where I live. And I'm surrounded by people of all races. And I thought, I can't just go on writing about white people for the rest of my life if I'm going to write about my own neighborhood. Mm-hmm. So I thought that has to be done. And then I do what I always do, which is try and think as hard about a character as I can, look at it from their perspective as much as I possibly can, read, talk. I took one of my son's friends out for dinner and talked to him. And then when I've done it, I gave it to some people of color and said, come on, tell me what I've done wrong. And actually, the most helpful note I had was somebody saying, well, they don't have to talk a lot about race. And I thought, oh, that's my nervousness on top of the character's nervousness. So some of it I actually took out and left the race chat for when it really mattered. But I'm not claiming these experiences as my own. I'm trying to make people come alive in a book and write about something that I care about and is interesting to me. And I think if you fail artistically. I don't think you fail morally or politically.
I think that's a really, really good point, and exactly the type of nuance that gets eradicated and on social media and these conversations about, it's not even nuance, it's not even that complicated.
Yeah. I mean, I don't think I'd write a book about slavery. It's absolutely, beyond, but this is where I am now in my borough, and I need to include as many people as possible in that.
And what's the response been to the book then, in terms of the fact that you have written about race in the way that you have? Have you had a lot of people wanting to engage you in conversations about that specifically?
Mostly it's been people asking exactly that question. Have you had a lot of people wanting to talk to you about it? The best review I had, in terms of a conversation with someone is I did an interview with for YouTube with a black historian and academic, and she was incredibly nice about the book during the interview. And then afterwards I said, come on, there must have been something. And she said, I look for this stuff all the time. That's my job. And I was annoyed to find that there was nothing that I could pick you up on. And I thought, oh my God, that's all I care about, actually, was her response. There's a scene in the book where Joseph has a slightly ill-fitting relationship with a young black woman who is studying English at university. And Lucy ends up taking her to Thomas Hardy's house, and this young black woman gets very patronized by some other people who are there, just saying how marvelous it is that she's there. And the woman who interviewed me said she whooped because, of course, that was her when she was a teenager.
You write women a lot. You write women a lot on screen as well as in your novels. Do you do that because you enjoy writing women? Is there a particular reason why you enjoy or you occupy the female voice as much as you do?
I enjoy writing women. I'm really interested in women. And the other thing that I kind of came to see was that in terms of drama, women's stories are actually often more interesting than men's because there are real obstacles. I mean, in my world, somebody like Rob in High Fidelity, the only obstacle is his own stupid head. There's nothing stopping him from getting what he wants anywhere apart from mild depression and aimlessness and self-consciousness. And then
so bloody infuriating.
Well, I'm sorry.
I love him.
But he seemed real to me. But I thought, you can't keep doing that. You can't keep writing about people who just shoot themselves in the foot. That's just not really drama. And I guess the thing that really changed for me was an education, the screenplay that I wrote for an education, because it was based on Lynn Barber's piece of memoir, and it was so a combination of proper obstacles and shooting yourself in the foot. And then the next step from that was in screen, if you write a great part for a woman, you get the best women actors in the world because there are no parts.
Yeah.
And as an incentive to write screenplays, that's incredible for me that I get to work with Reese Witherspoon and Carey and Saoirse Ronan and Rosamund Pike and
Laura Dern.
Laura Dern, and I'm writing for her again at the moment.
Are you?
Yeah, and it's just great to be asked to do things for these people. Whereas the men go, well, I like it, but someone's giving me $20 million to put a suit on, a superhero suit on. So, very nice try, but another time. and the women are like, just give me this, and that's a real joy. So it's kind of changed my own writing a little bit. I know it doesn't matter for novels, but it's made me think in that way.
Do you feel a sense of responsibility then as a screenwriter to write parts for women that are maybe go outside of the kind of stereotypical Hollywood sort of thing and write parts for older women? Do you feel that as a sense of responsibility, or do you just think about it kind of creatively?
Just creatively. I mean, I don't really feel the responsibility, but if nobody's writing parts for Meryl Streep and I've written a part for Meryl Streep, why wouldn't you do that? I'm not interested in kind of big mainstream Hollywood movies. I guess the movies tend to be more art movies than the books are literary novels, if you see what I mean. But they sort of collide in the middle.
That's more about Hollywood. That says a lot about.
Hollywood. Yeah. Well, it's the Hollywood. Yeah. But no, it's not. It's not the responsibility. It's the creative opportunity.
So let's talk a bit more about the script writing then. How does script, because I'm fascinated by it, and because it's so structural and so kind of unforgiving in so many ways, how do you approach them differently, novels and screenplays as discipline?
Well, for me, the big difference is that a novel, you can kind of start to work out what it's about while you're writing it, actually. And you can, they're big things, and you can correct paths accordingly. If it's taking you in this direction, you think, okay, I'll go with that. I don't think screenplays, you can do that. And they're 120 pages with not very much writing on them. They go by in a flash. And you can realize that you've finished it and you haven't said anything that you wanted to say in the first place. So it's impossible, I think, to do a good first draft of a screenplay, is what I'm saying. But you can get a decent first draft of a novel. Screenplays, it's drafting, cramming more and more in, cutting scenes down. You can't write a 5-page conversation, even if every single line is brilliant. Because it's a significant percentage of the finished product. One of the things with screenplays is trying to give the feeling at the end that you've been quite a long way in 90 minutes, even though you've got very few words and very few scenes to do that in. So it all feels like writing, but the challenges are very different.
What do you think about those, there's all those like how to write a screenplay books like Save the Cat and the Sid Field ones.
I've never been able to read one or get through one. And I've never written a treatment for a screenplay. That seems like dead writing to me. And every time I read anything about screenplays, I think I do it so wrong that I cannot understand how I've been let in a way that and then I think, well, I'm doing all right. The films get made and they get nominations. So I must stop worrying about not doing things the way that they tell me to do them in the books.
I think any of those kind of how-to approaches to a creative discipline always miss out the most important thing. And it's really difficult to articulate what that is. But if you're able to do it, you're able to do it. So you were Oscar and BAFTA nominated for Brooklyn and for An Education as well.
Yeah.
But particularly with Brooklyn, I wonder, how did you approach adapting that novel as a novelist yourself? Were you more sensitive to how Toibin might feel seeing his work adapted to screen and maybe have any anxiety around that? Or did you just go, right, I've got to turn this into a screenplay?
Well, I think writers take different approaches when they're being adapted. They think that they want to control everything, and that some of them think this, and that every scene in the book belongs in the film, and you can't cut this because this. And Colm was so cool. He was like, no, you got to do what you got to do. And the first draft I wrote, we went out for a cup of tea, and I was nervous. But he said, we wouldn't say rashers or bacon. We just say rashers. And that was one of his notes. I think, I can deal with that, Colm.
That's quite easy. I can hack that.
And
You're not going to go and cry in the corner and be like, oh God.
He wasn't, and we had lots of talks about mammy versus mummy. And it was a very specific part of Ireland that said mummy, and, you know, really interesting and helpful stuff. But I mean, he was great. And I don't think when a film comes out and when it's being, it's on an awards campaign trail, there are so many screenings, and I don't think Colm missed a single one. And quite often I sat next to him, and if I got a laugh from a line that I'd written that wasn't in the book, he'd nudge me like that. He couldn't have been happier or kinder or more supportive.
That's so generous. That's lovely. And what are you working on at the moment, Nick?
Well, I've written a second season of State of the Union for a different. I've sort of franchised the idea. So it's an older couple in exactly the same situation. I mean, it's the 10 minutes before therapy again, but this is two people in their early 60s. And then I'm trying to write some short 10-minute films for Laura Dern, a sort of one-woman little series. And then I've got this big TV drama series that I can't talk about at the moment because it's about real people and the permissions haven't yet been sorted. But it's music and real people.
So lockdown's been quite a productive time for you then, it sounds like. Yeah,
it didn't make a whole lot of difference to me, apart from the general levels of anxiety that we all experience. But, you know, it's quite an isolated life. One of the reasons I like doing screenplays is because I get to go out sometimes and talk to, you know, producers or directors or cast. There's some collaborative aspect, which I found at my age I really need. I've been a long time on my own in a room.
Just coming back what you were saying about State of the Union, because I did want to ask you about that. It seemed like technically it must be a real challenge, and I'm actually not surprised to hear that you're kind of taking that format, and because it seems like something that you could really work with other kinds of couples, because they're like two-handers with real emotional high stakes and very, very kind of closed in. How did you come up with it, first of all, and how did you approach writing it?
It was done entirely whimsically. I mean, I was in a period of screenplay writing, and there are lots of dead periods where there's no point in writing another draft because so-and-so has to respond, or you're trying to get money for this, or someone's reading it for casting. And there was a period where I had about 3 or 4 weeks where I knew I couldn't do anything. And I'd started reading about 10-minute series. There was a great one on Vimeo called High Maintenance, which was about a dope dealer, which I really loved.
Really good. It was really
it got to go into people's houses, and it had this little structure to it. And I thought, I don't know where it came from.
Characters in that, though. That wasn't just two people.
No.
People
I thought, actually, I don't know why I started thinking about the counselling aspect, but it's that chaos. Did you see the series In Treatment?
No.
Well, it was Gabriel Byrne was a therapist, but I think for me there's something fundamentally undramatic about therapy, because the conversation is guided and you're supposed to talk directly about what it is that's troubling you, and that's kind of antithetical to drama. But the point before that, where you're trying to get your stories straight, and they've got there's a whole week of life since the last one, and the last one maybe went wrong anyway, that you've got built-in material that you've got to cram into 10 minutes. And I tried to give each story a beginning, a middle, and an end in 10 pages. And they did come quite easily, and dialogue comes quite easily to me. And I wrote about 3 in this month period, and I sent them to a producer friend, and he said, absolutely, we could do something with this, which surprised me. So we went on from there.
just before we go, because we're coming to the end of our time now, can you tell us what you've been reading recently, and if you've got anything that you're excited by? Because one thing I started reading an Anne Tyler book that I read that you'd recommended, because I thought, speaking to Nick Hornby, I'll read that. And I've never read her before, and I just absolutely loved it. So I thought, oh, he'll be good at recommendations. We'll get him to give some more.
I think if I had to say that I was world class at something, I'm a world class recommender of books.
Right, give it to us. Come on.
Well, my two top tips from recent times. There's an American novelist called Kevin Wilson. And his new book, Nothing to See Here, is the most, it's just sad, funny, charming, accessible. It's about a rather troubled youngish woman who, for complicated reasons, is asked by a friend to look after two kids who are clearly have got issues in some way. And this is just the setup, so I'm not giving too much away. But when she finally confronts the woman, it's the stepmother of these children, so what's wrong with them? The woman says, well, they catch on fire. And these two kids self-combust at very inconvenient times. They have a condition where flames start coming out of them, and they don't hurt themselves, but obviously they cause a lot of carnage to everything around them. And it's done so straight and so it's so real and funny and kind of awful that you just can't stop reading. And it's a genius book, and it's the second genius book I've read by him, because there's one called The Family Fang about what it's like to be the children of performance artists. He just has a very unusual imagination, and he's a great writer. Kevin Wilson, Nothing to See Here. And the other one was, this was a recommendation I read in the paper from Kazuo Ishiguro, R.C. Sheriff's 1933 novel called The Fortnight in September, which is literally about 2 weeks, the 2 weeks that a family of five spend in Bognor Regis on their holiday, the same as every year. And it's beautiful and well observed, and it's not boring at all. It's a bit like Nicholson Baker. The detail is kind of so minutely observed that it's sort of funny. I mean, I don't think they get off the train till about page 100, but every incident is so well drawn. He wrote the play Journey's End. I didn't even know he'd written any novels.
Right. Thank you for your world-class book recommendation. And thank you for such a good chat as well. It's been an absolute...
I really enjoyed talking to you. Thank you so much.
Thank you so much. Just Like You is a brilliant read. And if you haven't got a copy yet, then you can buy it from the festival's Waterstones page. The link is in the email that you will have got confirming your ticket for this online event. Thank you so much to all of our digital audience. I'm sorry we can't see your faces, but I trust that you enjoyed it and that you laughed in all the right places. If you want to see more of this sort of thing and would like to support Manchester Literature Festival, you can make a donation via the website manchesterliteratureFestival.co.uk, and any contributions would be very welcome. So thank you to all of you, and thank you so much to Nick Hornby.
Thanks, Katie.